Well, if it's all right, we'll go ahead and begin with the last workshop of the afternoon. We've entitled it Making Everything Accessible from Entrepreneurship. First of all, we'll talk to Ana Belén Martinez Redondo, who's a technician in the Department of Training of the ONCE Foundation, and she'll tell us about the program that has been working for quite some time now in the foundation regarding the promotion of self-employment. And she'll give us some information on entrepreneurship that is that has been taking place in the last years. This afternoon we'll have two presentations in this workshop, and later we can have questions from the audience. Without further delay, I'll turn the floor over to Ana Belén, and she can tell us about the program of self-employment in Fundación ONCE. Well, thank you. First of all, please excuse the lack of presence of my director being here. She was unable to come because of complications with her agenda, but I'll take her place and do my best to tell you about the project. The main objectives that the ONCE Foundation have are integration of persons with disabilities into the work market and visibility in their environment. And in employment integration, one of the alternatives we find is the program for entrepreneurship, which the ONCE Foundation has undertaken. The profile of the people that we assist is very heterogeneous. And basically, it's heterogeneous in terms of disabilities, age, family situation. I must say it's important also to realize that many of the entrepreneurs become entrepreneurs because it's their only alternative to get into the job market. It's also important to say that they go in, but doing what they know how to do. So, within the program of entrepreneurship, we have 4 phases. We call them the ABCDs. And this is what training is, qualification. We have workshops for training that is given by a group that belongs to the ONCE Foundation and it has European funds. And the entrepreneurs have technical assistance that they receive so that they can learn how to set up a project that's viable and can be undertaken. When they have that project, they can receive an economic subsidy. Also, they receive assistance for consolidation, and there's follow-up of their project once it's underway. And to give you an idea of some figures, since 1988, when the ONCE Foundation was founded, this program has existed, this entrepreneurship program. It's helped over 1,500 projects with an amount of some 13 billion euros in funding. But in 2014, 1/3 of the funding, sorry, missed that figure, but let us say that There are more and more projects being presented by entrepreneurs as time goes by. So the profiles also show us a difference between women and men. Another differentiation we observe is in the sectors. Especially, we see sectors involving commerce and services, and something in agriculture and kiosk. But back in 1988 to 1990, most were kiosk, and now we're seeing other projects that are more innovative. And I'll tell you something about them now. I'd like to say that the economic subsidies I mentioned earlier is up to a maximum of 18,000 euros, or 40% of the startup cost for the activity. Usually, this is an average on per project of 10,000 euros. Here are some figures about what we have per year in terms of projects and the total amount of subsidies given out. You'll see, for example, that there has been an increase in the number of entrepreneurs from 2012 to 2015. Some examples. The main thing I'd like to say here in the last years, there's been a big increase in innovative projects, in green employment, in new technologies, environmental projects. For example, we've got IDO Consult, which is a consulting firm for cartography. It uses drones. We also have a project within our entrepreneurs that is a fashion store, but at the same time it provides cafeteria services and has events and storytelling. It's something different. It's new in the concept of stores. Another project we have, well, we've got our entrepreneur, Caracol Van. He rents the famous campers from the 80s and the 1970s. We also have Alberto Dewey. This person rents out small plots of land so that people can have their ecological gardens. We also have Altavoz, which is a consulting firm that works on cognitive learning. And we have Adadada, which is a startup dedicated to audio description and subtitling of works of contemporary art. It's an audiovisual. We can talk about the entrepreneurship program that is currently underway. We're making a study to see the needs and opinions that our entrepreneurs have. So for this purpose, we have already undertaken some 500 interviews. The first results we've seen show that there are important survival rates in our projects, about 70%. That's the average. From the time of creation, they continue operating. That 70% continues operating today since their outset. Another need that we have cited is training in the consolidation stages of the company, especially in some areas. For this purpose, we have designed an online course of digital marketing for finance management. This next Monday, it will begin. We've selected 50 participants, and the profile of the students is on the screen. We have, let's say, most students are male, 41 years of age on average. They are university graduates. They live in the city in urban areas, and they are involved in the service sector. That's more or less everything. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Ana Belén. I think there's something really important that the ONCE Foundation does, which is self-employment. Now we're all talking about entrepreneurship, but self-employment is something that the ONCE Foundation has been behind for years. And now we talk about inclusion of disabled persons. We need to see that the context, the low context of self-employability that there is everywhere, many times it's the only choice that people with disabilities have. So it's very relevant that we cite this type of program as being outstanding. What I manage is a social startup in Murcia, Spain, and its aim is to create new projects of entrepreneurship where we can build tools that are more accessible and usable for everyone. We're going to see the example of what we call augmentative communication of business. It's a tool to design business models that are used by entrepreneurs and disabled persons and entrepreneurs without disabilities. It's a tool that is based on universal design. Especially, I would like to give you 4 clear messages. On the one hand, we have to take entrepreneurship to those persons who most need it, those groups who are most going to benefit from entrepreneurship. Secondly, many times we speak of popularizing inclusion in development of products and services. We must do this at the early stages of the design of these products and services. And entrepreneurship in the beginning stages of any project is ideal to include inclusion in projects. If we wait until the end, as usually happens, we know what happens. We're just patching up and making solutions of accessibility, which are very costly, and we're still contributing to the myth that accessibility is expensive. It's not true. It's just expensive when it's added on in late stages. But if it's something that we do from the beginning, it's not costly. That's one of our aims, is to get that across. And then any entrepreneur has to be able to listen and collaborate, and the participation, collaboration around projects is absolutely essential. And lastly, I'd like to cite that there's a very passionate field of work that I invite you to collaborate with us. It's the development of new tools and platforms that will stimulate ecosystems that that are inclusive for entrepreneurs. And here we see an image. Well, I don't think we're seeing my presentation on the screen. My presentation is not on the screen. My presentation is important, the visual part. I'm going to be very audio descriptive, but we need it. Thank you. So augmentative communication is the first product, support product that we have established, and also it's for business. And I'd like to clearly specify the aims that we have in our closed funding. It's for everyone, disabled persons and non-disabled persons, and it's for entrepreneurs. And I want to talk about how we're facing the challenges we have. I know many of you know a lot about this topic, but sometimes I talk about this sort of product and people don't know what a business model is. And this also happens with a lot of entrepreneurs, which is really critical, because the business model will allow the entrepreneur somehow to design clearly and coherently his project and offer it and we can offer the entrepreneur help and support through this project. So the business model is important. And we'll talk about business models and sustainability, business for all, and a few other things later on. But the first aim is to bring the tools to the entrepreneurs so that they can use them, and a lot of them aren't aware of these tools and don't know how to use them, or they're not accessible to them. So we're trying to reduce barriers for individual research and to foster entrepreneurship that is more linked to local development, to local spaces, to impact on our communities, to foster close by collaboration, and to reinforce the fidelity, the loyalty that we have among our products and services. And we want practical cases. We don't have to invent anything new. A lot of time we have local projects that can be carried over to other entrepreneurial areas. And when things can be put into practice in different contexts and by different persons, this is very good. We want to popularize inclusive factors. I have to say that the Convention on Human Rights of Persons with Disabilities by the UN say that we have to promote the design, development, and production and distribution at early stages in order for these to be accessible at a lower cost. And we've got to have rules, directives, methodologies that we can use when we create new services and products. And of course, everything that has to do with entrepreneurship has to be bear in mind this convention. But it's not that way. In fact, no tool includes accessibility or universal design in its development. Another aim, obviously, that Ana Belén mentioned, and I'll go a little bit faster now, is that we want to foster leadership of disabled persons in entrepreneurship. We see that a lot of times people are setting up self-employed positions, but we need to really stop seeing the systematic exclusion of disabled persons in entrepreneurship and in businesses that are not self-employment setups. Above all, in close funding, we've been working to have disabled persons lead entrepreneurship, not just be included, but to be in the value chain of the entrepreneurship, and that's extremely important. Lastly, as an aim, we must clearly define the needs of the entrepreneur. For us, entrepreneurship is acquiring a series of skills, ultimately. And the person who is successful will be he or she who can offer entrepreneurs access to a product or something at an early stage. And this is offering tools, references, and supports that are adequate and personalized based on the needs of the entrepreneur. So we need to be accessible in our entrepreneurship, and we consider using universal design and its parameters of inclusion within the new creation of new ecosystems to get better yields, more support for peoples, and to lower cost, and to achieve greater impact of results thanks to a better alignment with reality. So we see an opportunity that is huge for accessibility, and puts accessibility in the focus, in the center. But we have a big challenge. The entrepreneurship reality is more disabling than ever before. I'd like to say, if self-employment is not exactly accessible for people who are not, who don't suffer disabilities, imagine what it's like for disabled individuals. And to talk about the context of the entrepreneur with disabilities, it's very much under people without disabilities, and there are huge barriers that we need to demolish. But I'd like to try to talk about the general context of the entrepreneur. It's very difficult for anyone now to be an entrepreneur. We know that there's been a huge technological advance, and it's been mentioned a lot today in all sectors. We are in a world that is super connected and very collaborative. There is a new generation of consumers and workers who are digital natives, and there's more focus on personalization and individualization of experience than ever before. We've got more competition and more information, more noise than ever, and we are especially beginning to see that it's quite fashionable to have aware consumption, ethical principles in projects, and it's about not competing or just having projects based on cost. Now we've got to add in value, factors of value, where our consumers will perceive of an added value beyond the mere cost. This change, quick change, rapid change in our world because of technology's revolution. Well, here we have a picture of St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. Just 8 years ago, we have up on the top all of the pilgrims, and then in 2013 we see how the picture changes and everyone has a mobile phone. The Nielsen consulting firm says that 55% of consumers would be willing to pay for products that are more socially responsible and have impact investments. This is something very important nowadays. Forbes has many articles that emphasize the processes businesses undergoing, where we see they are becoming more collaborative, and that's resulting in greater economic performance. But above all, what we see is the social session of entrepreneurship, and this was something we hadn't seen before the last years. Consumers now have more ability to more say than ever before, and our community is more involved with us. We're talking about collaborative entrepreneurship, about people who are distributed teams. We're talking about innovation with value, perceived value, not just about technological innovation. Technology in and of itself doesn't have value for the person, for the individual. The individual is interested in achieving his goals, values, and we have more capability for listening, more empathy. And above all, we've started throwing out business plans, and we're opting more for design rather than planification, because we need more and more agility. In an entrepreneurship project, we see things change from month to month as opportunities change. Even behaviors change among our customers. You see that, and you have to change your business model. So we've got to talk more about design and less about planning when we're talking about entrepreneurship. And social session means that entrepreneurship sees this taking over its boundaries, and we see social practices being used to sell more, and vice versa. Entrepreneurs, we see tools that have only been used in the economic sphere or financial sphere, and they're being applied now elsewhere because due to the scarcity of resources, we need to find new sources of income that will allow us to gain more sustainability, and this is happening today. One example of this is Locotimid CMS. 4 months ago it published in its blog, "We failed. Our business model has failed. We inform you we're closing our project," and spontaneously all its community and customers started giving opinions and recommendations about how it could innovate its strategy, what product people liked best. And a month and a half later, it gained a new business model, and this company is still in business thanks to the crowd, to its customers, and to its social connections. So new opportunities and also a lot of complexity. And we have more complexity, but we therefore need to allow diversity to manage that complexity in entrepreneurship. If a project can't recognize or acknowledge diversity, the impact of its project won't be as great as it could be. In the current context where we've seen greater social session in projects, diversity is something we have got to manage. It's extremely essential for any entrepreneur, not only disabled entrepreneurs, to manage this well. And diversity gives rise to inclusion. So inclusion of diversity is more and more important. Here we see a series of athletes trying to go across in a relay race. This is to show entrepreneurship and how little prepared entrepreneurs are to converse with each other. There's not enough collaborativeness. We should start talking about the entrepreneurship gap. And here everyone is taking part in entrepreneurship, but what are we offering? How do we go about it? We talk about usability of entrepreneurship. How can we create practical tools, simple tools that will allow us at the same time to manage this diversity and complexity that we have and do this daily? And we have to worry about dignity, we have to be concerned with it, and with participation in ecosystems of entrepreneurship. I like to use the iceberg metaphor when what we see above water is, of course, a project. We have cities, we have our products, services, but underneath that surface, we have a business model that really allows us to support our project. So briefly, I'm going to mention business models and why they're so important. They allow entrepreneurs to define how the project, his or her project, can be created, how products can give value to the customers. And as I said earlier, it's not just important for the entrepreneur, but for ourselves. If we want to give support to the entrepreneur, we have to understand his business project in a precise and specific way in order to optimize his resources in our program. Therefore, the business model is something we need to all understand, but the situation is such that very few people, in fact, two of every three have not articulated their business model. They have no idea of how to design their project. And this is even more dramatic, bearing in mind that everyone has a business model, whether they know it or not. It's there. One thing is that it may not be optimum, but we need to be able to recognize it, because otherwise we can never innovate on it. Therefore, the business model is not a very accessible thing. And we've got, especially if we aren't collaborative and trusting, and we're not inclusive. These are all things we have to include in our business models. And we talked earlier about proximity and being able to experiment and to get an edge on our competitors. We've got to do this by the experiments, by trial and error. We have to fail and we have to be agile, dynamic in our entrepreneurship. So the tools that are currently out there are not enough. That's obvious. They're not connected to all the rest of these factors that I'm mentioning now. They're not bearing in mind these human factors, and they're not even accessible. They're not usable. So look what's happening. Technology, if it's not accessible, it can turn out that it can become a source of exclusion, which is what happens with technology. If technology is taking away access, if there's a distance that's being created because of the speed of technology and we're not able to keep up, there are more and more gaps. The same thing happens in entrepreneurship. If we don't have the right tools, everything is going to fall to the wayside, and the people who need accessibility to use the tools, let's not forget them. There are Canvas and Business Fabric, different techniques for establishing business models. But let's remember, I'm not going into those, but remember that these, the situation we have now is not proper to promote entrepreneurship, and there is a big lack of collaboration. So why do we have to improve, of course, our design? We've got to be able to manage more complexity with greater simplicity. Now we'll see how we can go about that. Let's think if we're able to create better tools, we'll be able to improve the skills of the entrepreneurs. We'll be able to give them better reasoning, and we'll be able to undertake better projects. So
this is why we are talking about new tool models for more inclusive and progressive entrepreneurship. What I'm about to introduce is Business for All, or Business Augmentative Communication, the first tool of design, collaboration, and support for startups creating using universal accessibility principles. It includes the principles that I mentioned, social, collaborative, and inclusive principles since the very beginning. It's inclusion by design. That would be our motto. What we want is for inclusive business to become a daily strategy, a daily reference for other environments, for other stakeholders with and without disabilities, so that we can make inclusive business become business as usual. Something that is very important, and we're very aware of it. The great difference that there is between creating something using universal design or adapting something that already exists. Sometimes adapting something that already exists is creating patches. What we're doing since the very beginning here is creating an accessible project using universal accessibility principles. So we apply cognitive accessibility principles from the COGA task force group, from Accessibility Initiative W3C. Being aware of the fact that if we apply cognitive accessibility to business design tools, we will facilitate other ways of interacting, because we will be including extra information for confusing aspects. For instance, we got inspired in augmentative communication systems, which are based on icons, and they're used by people who have reading comprehension issues or people who have issues with the body organs that govern speech. But most importantly, these are systems that intend the purpose of accessing to increasingly complex levels of communication. And in the world of startups, communication is more complex than ever. So why don't we apply these augmentative communication systems to entrepreneurship, to this disenabling environment of entrepreneurship, because it's difficult to communicate here. So here we have the first vocab for augmentative communication in business. It's composed by 54 elements. I won't go into detail because we would need a specific workshop to talk about this vocab in Business for All. But most importantly, what we do is to divide these elements into two types. Elements that represent stakeholders, business stakeholders, which are people or roles within our project's business model. And on the other hand, we have different types of relationships or value exchanges of the economic sort, but also of the non-economic kind. For instance, we have up to 5 types of non-economic relationships that are complementary to other relationships which are indeed of the economic kind. Ultimately, this will enable us to better manage diversity, the diversity underlined the people and the value exchanges within our community, and to become more aware of the relationships that take place within our project and that can give rise to a more sustainable activity. At the end of the day, what we have is a representation of this kind. They're called value exchange networks. In each startup, we know that collaboration is increasingly more important and that most projects are geared toward communities, and the relationships in business models need to change to become a network. In this network, we observe stakeholder elements and value exchanges among those stakeholders. We will now see some examples as to how, using this new approach, we will be able to shape up any inclusive startup. We will use a scheme that will foster collaboration, and at the same time, it will foster co-creation with other people. This is very important. We're just not fostering collaborative scheme for our projects. It will also become more important and easier to co-design, co-create with other people in our business model. This is something that we already have in Business for All. We have an example whereby we connect people from Latin America, France, and Spain, and we co-create around a business model in an accessible manner. Something that is very important too is that in Business for All we have introduced inclusive icons. An inclusive icon set that involves that in the icon representation we introduce in a natural manner some aspects that have to do with accessibility for disabled people. But we do it in a natural manner because at the end of the day this is being used by disabled and non-disabled people. But we want entrepreneurs to know that their communities, their end users, are diverse, and we have people with and without a disability that will be using them. And here what we're doing is to make all these entrepreneurs aware of the fact that they need to use inclusive icons. This is important if we want to foster entrepreneurship in an inclusive manner. We need to make entrepreneurs become aware of the disabilities and the diversity of our communities. That's very important, but also these elements are accessible on the one hand side for people who are visually impaired. We have Braille and QR codes introduced, and we have also added some solutions for people who have accessibility issues with color. We have a colorblind friendly mode for people who are colorblind, and we have a high contrast version, which is what you can see on the slide right now. As you can see on the background, we have Braille, QR codes, we have textures for people who are colorblind, and we also have a high contrast version. So we have a physical version that is about to be produced in the upcoming months. It's a toolbox intended to design projects, and we also have an online version. We have a first draft of this online environment, and this has enabled us to provide services and support to entrepreneurs in an ongoing manner for their entrepreneurial projects in an agile manner, and also involving people who are located in other continents or people who might be very interested in this type of project, and that's very important. What's better than involving those people that can become collaborators, involving them in your startup or entrepreneurial project? This is something that we achieved through the online environment of Business for All. And now we're going to see some practical examples of how this enables us to quickly and effectively shape up complex activity, including many variables, and that revolve around inclusive projects. And in this manner, we will be able to see how other entrepreneurs are doing this somewhere else in the world, because often They're using strategies that can be imported or adapted to our entrepreneurial projects. One of the tasks that we do through crowdfunding is to detect entrepreneurial projects that have an inclusive DNA and that contribute towards the strengthening of local economies. We have over 150 projects already located worldwide that have inclusive environments, and they have to do with different spheres, with inclusive tourism, public services. We have about 150, as I said. These are examples that can be adapted, and they're very scalable because many of these projects have the positive trait of being quite low cost because they introduce social and collaborative aspects. They cut down the implementation costs, as long as we are able to manage the complexity, of course, of the business model. But ultimately, these are models that can be used in our project. I'm quickly going to mention some of these projects that combine economic and social goals, such as, for instance, the vegetable garden of Monte Carmelo here in Madrid, funded by Fundación Caldo Valcarce. It's using a social micro-franchise model, which is very interesting, and they offer customized vegetable garden in our cities, which are looked after by people with an intellectual disability. This is a very interesting inclusive employment scheme, and it's represented through Business for All in this manner. Here we have the business model that shows the sustainability of the Monte Carmelo vegetable garden. This is something that we did in collaboration with some entrepreneurs in 15 minutes after, of course, having included the icons of Business for All. We also have the Be My Eyes project. This is a project that entails a great entrepreneurship opportunity for many people. It's an open source project, and it shows how micro-volunteering can use collaborative economies to provide more accessible solutions. They have created a mobile app, a video chat that puts in contact people who are blind with people who are not blind, and these people who are not blind support these blind people to solve daily tasks through video chat. But it's an open source technology. Why couldn't we use this technology in other application environments? Why can't we apply this for accessible tourism or active aging for the elderly? This is an entrepreneurship opportunity for everybody. It's located in the US, this project, but the technology is available for everybody. We also like homeless funds in crowdfunder. They provide visibility for vulnerable groups, specifically for people who are homeless, living on the streets, and they create typographies using calligraphies of these people that live on the street. And they have created this model using co-creation sessions with people who are homeless. They created these calligraphies that are ultimately turned into typographies that are sold as socially responsible products, and they're sold to individuals and companies. Here we have a sustainable model, which is indeed representing Business for All in a quite quick manner. We could also mention Prometeo app. It's an accessible tourism application aimed for people who have hearing disabilities. It's a social network for hearing impaired travelers, and they combine information for accessible tourism for many destinations. They're creating a very interesting business model that could possibly be improved in this manner. And just to conclude the series of examples, we could also ponder how YouFeed does to donate money to NGOs, to fund NGOs without money. This sounds weird, but thanks to collaboration and social principles, we are capable of doing this. What they do in YouFeed is to collaborate with private entities that make a commitment to donate per tweet or Facebook post that the community disseminates. They make the commitment to donate some cents to an NGO, which in this case is fighting malnourishment. And these models are ultimately models that are aimed at underserved markets. And this is very interesting because until now we considered that underserved markets were not interesting business opportunities, but now this is an open opportunity for these entrepreneurs because they're more minority businesses, because they aim at minor segments, but they require new business models because they represent challenges, new challenges. These business models are more complex, but they can ultimately be more sustainable, and they enable us to differentiate ourselves at a lower cost, which is what enables us to be sustainable. So differentiation plus low cost equals sustainability. That's a clear-cut formula for me. It's something that always gets it right in startups. And what we're doing here is to create experiences for this community group. In crowdfunding, we talk about business value, but I like to talk about experience models. We should talk about creating experiences more often for our communities. And especially to be aware of the fact that changing a business model a little bit already entails innovation. You don't need a super technology. You don't need a research and development department to create a new business model. It's something that entrepreneurs are doing already, using business for all. Here we have some examples, both in Mar Menor, in the east of Spain, where we are located, as well as in other parts of Spain, France, and Ecuador. We have a series of videos that we could watch later if we have some time, but ultimately what they're doing is to create their own business models and their own startups. This is the case of Vicente. In Mar Menor, he's 55 and he's only worked for 1 month in his whole life. The only way that he has to get to work is self-employment, so he didn't know how to start using creating his new project. So he created this new business using Business for All to create negotiations around it. And this project, thanks to ISPAIM in Murcia, is becoming a reality. And lastly, we have another example of how universal design is tool in this type of tools, which is something that happens when we go on a ramp in the street. Most people use ramps, even if you're not using a wheelchair. Thanks to this application of universal design, we use Business for All not just to design business models, but also to get businesses to use it on a daily manner, on a daily basis. For instance, I'm going to use the example of Airbnb. It's a collaborative platform to provide housing for people who share their homes, so that they can provide accommodation to users in any city. And they thought, okay, we want to see if the users of a platform book more nights, if they have a list of images in a more professional manner. Just consider this. They said, okay, we want to maximize the numbers of nights that people book, but maybe those accommodations, those houses that don't have professional images are the ones that are booked the least. So what they did is to do an experiment. They hired some photographers and they took some pictures of the houses, and this is the outcome. We shaped up this experiment with Business for All because it introduces co-creation concepts, which is very important for this type of projects. And the result is that bookings were multiplied by 10. This is something that could be applied to any entrepreneurial project, which is to do ongoing experimentation. One of the great conclusions of Business for All is that when users apply this, they say, I want to use this every single week so that I can run experiments with my users, so that I can validate this with my users. Also here we have a practical example of use of this business model in SMEs. This is a photocopy business. They use collaborative principles to collaborate with local entities. They have enhanced some of their processes, and this copy center is called Babel in Murcia, and now the business model is more complex, but it enables them to offer photocopies for university students in Murcia free of charge. So they completely challenged the business sector in Murcia. This is a completely differentiated business model. This is an example of how we can all have the same idea, but the best business model is the one that reaches success. And Papel has got to success using these collaborative principles, new technologies. They have innovated their business model, and it's a traditional business. It's a photocopy business, and you might think that everything was invented in that sector. Well, you can see that it isn't. And then we have another application which is quite successful and is done in collaboration with our partners in QA, this company. We have used Business for All for inbound marketing enhancement. Because sometimes when you want to deliver a marketing service to a company, the main problem that you find is that you don't really know their services or the products of that business. You don't really know what the added value is. So you create a marketing approach, which is suboptimal. So with our partners QA, we're already delivering the services for Tecnoseñal, this company, which is a small multinational. They do signaling for Unilin, they do panels, signaling. Also, they work for AENA. They provide digital information points. We are delivering marketing services for them on a digital manner using the Business for All tool for better characterizing their services and to further align their strategy with the business objectives. So this facilitates understanding for everybody. And just to conclude, I'd say that Business for All is the first accessible co-creation environment. It includes diversity and inclusive practices in the DNA of the startup. It also quickly facilitates capturing the essence of a project to reconceive and reconfigure from a holistic manner, from a cross-cutting manner for our project, and to better align our project with our community. Because as I said earlier, the social inclusion in this project is really relevant. And most importantly, I would like to say that the online environment that we provide favors creativity and distributed collaboration, which is something of a huge value for entrepreneurs. And we provide progressive support, ongoing support, and it enables entrepreneurs to learn progressively and in a more customized and safe manner. And just to conclude, I would like to quote John Gardner, saying that the only stability possible is stability in movement. Why am I saying this? Because at the end of the day, this tool needs to be framed within an iterative methodology. We just mentioned Business for All, but we have also developed a methodology that arises from the Lean Startup methodology, which is called Lean Inclusion. It enables us to design the project, but also to run experiments, to get data and evidences in an analytical manner, and then restart with using those concepts. And this puts inclusive design at the core of startups. So we implement this methodology that we have detected at an international level. And once again, I want to quote someone who has autism, temperament need. I always think of him when we talk about this, and he says that he thinks in images, and when someone talks to him, the person's words are turned into images immediately. This is what we are trying to represent with Business for All in the scope of business models, because we're trying these business models into icons and images. That would be all from me in my presentation. I would just like to say that in a few months we will have an encounter in the east side of Spain, and we will talk about accessible tourism. We will use these tools to analyze entrepreneurial projects in this line of work so that we can put forward some accessible tourism ideas for Mar Menor, for the east of Spain. And I have already finished my presentation. I would like to move on now to the QA session, because we have a few minutes left, so we can respond to some questions now. It's your turn to ask now. First, I would like to congratulate you. Your presentation was very eloquent. And thank you, because you created something understandable and really accessible. You made collaborative economies really understandable. I really enjoyed how you framed this, how you set the context. But at some point in your intervention, in your presentation, I saw an evident contradiction. So I would like you to clarify it. One thing is collaborative economy that enables us to create a new economic model in which we're not just trying to accumulate, we want economies to provide services for users. And at some point you said that involving users in this economy is a way to cut down costs, to cut back costs. So in a way, in Spain, we have a crisis, and you would be doing something for companies so that they can overcome this crisis. So in a way, we're trying to come up with a different type of economy, which is not really a collaborative economy. And I'm thinking of what happened in Spain in the 90s with volunteering programs. After everything that happened in 92 and the Olympics, the social status, the welfare system couldn't afford to maintain the level of services, and they thought that volunteering would be a way to cut back state cost. But in a way, they were contributing to building up the state. You see how perverse this argument is? So I would like you to clarify this. In particular, I do consider that both positions are quite valid, but I would stand for the first one, which is the approach I think you wanted to explain. But I think there's a contradiction there. I think collaborative economies are, in a way, a two-sided blade, because they're challenging the value chain. Sometimes the value chain, when you introduce collaborative economies or collaborative approaches, you cut down some costs because some services are obtained at cost zero. So it depends on how you use it. Yes, but allow me to introduce a nuance here. You mentioned Airbnb. That's not a collaborative economy. It's a business that harnesses from the opportunity of being able to offer lower cost accommodation. And in your apartment, as a user, you can create a space to get a profit, but they are not intending to do collaborative economy programs here. They're using a collaborative scheme in a way. But that's the current discussion, I think. What is a collaborative economy, and how do we harness the need to collaborate? When I talk about collaboration, I'm not always talking about collaborative economy. I'm talking about participation schemes. Okay, we can agree on that. We're talking about participative, collaborative schemes. Some of those projects fit better into collaborative economies, and some others are indeed perverting value chains, as you said, and some others don't necessarily have to do that if we maintain sustainability and ethical criteria within this collaborative scheme. When I say collaborative economy, that's a part of those participative models. Yes, they're complementary, I'd say. Yes, participative is more general, I think. Thank you. We have a question at the back of the room. Hola, voy a hacer la pregunta en inglés, me disculpo. ¿Qué papel desempeña el Estado en darle soporte a los emprendedores? Hablo en nombre de alguien que está ubicado en Londres, donde tenemos bastantes incentivos fiscales para los inversores que entran en esquemas del ICS, por ejemplo, que insta a hacer estas soluciones de crowdfunding por estos beneficios fiscales. No sé si esto ocurre también en España, y me parece que también es un proceso muy oneroso el montar una empresa en España si eres un emprendedor. Me parece que es un proceso muy largo, que conlleva mucho tiempo. Perdona, entonces, ¿cuál es tu pregunta? Mi pregunta es qué papel tiene el Estado en estos reglamentos para los emprendedores y también estas contribuciones en cuanto a beneficios fiscales que se pueden obtener al crear nuevas startups, nuevas empresas. Tú hablas entonces de los reglamentos, de la legislación para los esquemas de empresarios. Bueno, es que solamente puedo hablar del mercado de Reino Unido, pero allí tenemos bastantes esquemas en los cuales se les da beneficio a los inversores que inviertan en estos startups, de manera que de alguna manera puedan capear las pérdidas. Si pierden todo el dinero que han invertido, el Estado les da beneficios fiscales. Si han invertido todo ese dinero en estas empresas de emprendedores, en estas startups, lo que vemos es una gran entrada de inversores que se meten en este mercado, porque de alguna manera se puede compensar las pérdidas fiscales. En este sentido, los inversores que hay en España durante el último par de años han visto que efectivamente hay nuevas ventajas para poder financiar a estas empresas de nueva creación, a los emprendedores. Creo que no tienen que pagar casi impuestos, por lo tanto pueden realizar la inversión. Me parece que la reducción fiscal es del 20%. si invierten en startups, en empresas de nueva creación. Se centra en estas startups y creo que ahora se está valorando crear una nueva relación, un nuevo sistema para el crowdfunding, para las economías colaborativas. Ahora mismo el gobierno ha fijado un límite de 2.000 euros en las estrategias de crowdfunding por proyecto. Gracias. La intérprete se disculpa, pero se realiza la pregunta sin micrófono. In Latin America, you mentioned Latin America. Is there something in Mexico? Which one was it? I'm not really sure, but I think it's Rocks on Wheels, I think it's called. And they create customized bicycles using recycled materials. And there's another one, I think, which is a messaging system, a courier system at the local level, where they involve citizens to deliver parcels to companies and to individuals. Business for All is a software, right? Can we get in contact with you? Right now we have an environment that is already being used. Nevertheless, it has not yet been put into the market. We are running experiments. We are already using it. Maybe if you want, we can meet so that we can do some tests and we can have some sessions together to see how this supports you. But we're also looking for collaborators so that we can develop the technological base of the project, because we want it to be 100% accessible. It's really interesting, but you don't work along the lines of Impact Hub, where they develop small companies using universal thinking and universal design thinking. You're asking me if we're part of that network? What's the name again? Impact Hub? No, we're not part of that network. Who knows? Maybe in the future. Ricardo, over there. Hello. As a businessman, how could I collaborate or become part of the platform? We're just about to release the first version of the website. You will see the project map of inclusive entrepreneurship that we have detected worldwide, and we continue to detect some. And you will see that there's a section for promotions. There we will include offers that have to do with the implementation of these entrepreneurial projects. So on the one hand side, if you were a development technology provider company or graphic design or legal assessment for entrepreneurs, there you could post your services, the services that you offered for these entrepreneurs. And also in upcoming months, we will create a network of advisors at the global level so that we can provide global support for startups. So if you fit into that profile better, we could come up with a collaboration for the next months, in upcoming months. We need to see how exactly, but you could become part of that global advisory network for this inclusive projects. Well, first, I would like to congratulate you for your presentation and for everything that you're doing. Thank you. And my question would be the following. If a country of a small size, or not so small, it doesn't matter, but if a country needs to intensify or enhance the labor inclusion policy for disabled people, in this case, favoring entrepreneurial projects delivered by vulnerable groups in general, but more specifically for disabled people, do you think that crowdfunding and Business for All could really help governments to really create more entrepreneurial projects, more inclusive in the labor market, to introduce more disabled people. I mean, to really create an impact, and to include more people who were not part of the productive chain of the country. Do you think that they could include them? Thank you. Well, I think there first we have to detect the opportunities in the creation chains so that we can include those vulnerable groups in those value chains. And those value chains might or might not already exist. So we need to really detect and analyze those value chains. And there we could use Business for All, introducing other parts of the comprehensive methodology, of course, that we have in place. But this should indeed come together with that compilation of projects that's already ongoing so that we can detect the assets that we already have to create those new initiatives. So we should do a general X-ray of everything that we have, of the groups that we want to further involve, so that from that point on we can start to co-create with them. Something that I didn't mention is that we are also going to provide certain opportunities. For instance, if a country in particular has an entrepreneur network and they want their own version of the Business for All toolkit, we can customize it. So if a certain government already has a need, we can update the icons so we can adapt them to that country or that entrepreneurial network. We want to change the basics, but we can adapt some of the icons. For instance, David Benz said something quite important today about Qatar. He's mentioned the importance of cultural aspects for the purpose of strengthening inclusion. So we can ponder the opportunity of providing customized versions to each country of each community, different versions of Business for All. That would be an added value that would be complementary to everything I already mentioned when answering your question. Are there any other questions? I do have a question for you. What's the profile of entrepreneurs that you have detected in recent times? I mean, what are the changes? What were the entrepreneurs like 8 years ago? And what's the type of entrepreneur that goes to you now to request your support? Well, I think what has changed is the type of activities. Now they're more innovative. In the beginning, if we refer back to the beginning of this program, when we created Fundación 11 Foundation in the year 1998, the projects that we normally received were from small kiosks and taxis, for instance. But as time goes by, we now see more shops, bars, but currently, as I mentioned earlier, we still have some fashion stores in our portfolio, but they're introducing now more innovative components. For instance, the example of Evase, it's a shop, a clothes shop that has introduced some innovative components to improve their business. So now we are seeing an increasing number of projects that have a traditional business model, but they introduce some innovative approaches. Yes, I saw that there is a vintage clothes store that has introduced diversity components so they can be more sustainable. Yes, or Caracol Van, for instance. They don't just rent vehicles for holidays. This guy has already transformed his camper vans so that he can offer them for accessible tourism around Cadiz. So they are introducing some innovative components. Well, thank you very much. If there's no further questions, there's one final question right there. It will be the last one this afternoon. Hello, good afternoon. Hello, how are you, Jesus? I'm fine. Well, rather than asking a question, I wanted to make a remark, even though for me it's also a question. I had the opportunity to get acquainted with your tool in a very early phase, and I had some experience in entrepreneurial projects back then. And I could see that what you were doing was to bring closer companies that had a business approach that was very general, but I consider that in order to introduce disabled people in the business fabric, and indeed there are regulations about it and there's an interest, but sometimes businesses don't have the knowledge to do it. And it's very interesting for businesses to see how useful these tools are. For many years, I have been working in teams and I have designed many strategies, but I think that Business for All offers new opportunities. So I need to congratulate you because the design is great and the project is fantastic. And also I need to congratulate you for your presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Jesus. You are also mentioning a use of Business for All that goes beyond corporate spheres, and it's been a pleasure for me to address this audience. So if there are no further questions, I think we can close the session. It's already quite late. Hopefully we won't have get into a traffic jam when we leave here, but I need to thank you all, and thank you so much for your attention.